Where there is discord, may we bring harmony. Where there is error, may we bring truth. Where there is doubt, may we bring faith.
On Monday, Baroness Margaret Thatcher, the Prime Minister of the UK from 1979 to 1990, died at the age of 87. This week, many of the familiar rituals that mark the passing of a leader are unfolding. There were glowing tributes from the UK's Prime Minister David Cameron and President Obama and Prime Minister Harper.
A truly historic figure, remembered for centuries to come. What she did, not just in Britain, but what she did on the world stage, really laid the groundwork for the freedom and the prosperity and opportunity that so many people around the world enjoy today.
But her death also reopened a deep wellspring of resentment. There were street parties in places like Brixton in London.
The witch is dead!
And by week's end, an organized campaign made this the #1 most downloaded song on the UK charts.
Ding dong, the witch is dead. Witch, oh witch, the wicked witch. Ding dong, the wicked witch is dead.
In death, the opponents of Thatcher used music to voice their dissent, just as they had when she was alive. The English Beat in 1980 called for Maggie to stand down.
Stand down, Margaret, stand down, please stand down, Margaret.
Morrissey dreamed of her death.
When will you die? When will you die?
And Elvis Costello imagined standing on her grave.
But when they finally put you in the ground, they'll stand there laughing and tramp the dirt down.
The dissent was direct, it was personal, and it was passionate. And the Iron Lady wasn't the only target. For much of her time in power in the 1980s, conservative governments also held sway in the US and Canada under Ronald Reagan and Brian Mulroney. And political dissent was as important to underground music here as it was in England. Here to discuss the intersection of music and politics in the 1980s are three musicians who were in the thick of it then and are still hugely influential today. From Vancouver is Joey Keithley, leader of the pioneering punk band DOA. Joey, welcome to Day 6.
Yeah, how you doing?
Very, very well. Thanks for being with us.
Yeah.
From Los Angeles, we're joined by Mike Watt of the Minutemen, fIREHOSE, the reformed Iggy and The Stooges, and many other projects. Mike Watt, thank you for being with us.
Hi there, Brett.
Hi.
Thanks for having me aboard.
My pleasure to have you with us. And joining us from a tour date in Winnipeg, Billy Bragg. He is supporting his new album, Tooth and Nail, and now he joins us in Day 6. Billy, welcome to the program.
Great to be here, Brent.
Billy, when Margaret Thatcher died, you released a statement saying this is not a time for celebration. So how do you feel about Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead becoming the #1 song in the UK?
Well, people are going to react, aren't they? And I think using the charts in that way is all well and good. But the policies that Margaret Thatcher introduced are still being run through my country like a sword. And if you want to do something about them, rather than messing around with the charts, you should be out there and getting active. My sense is that rather than celebrating, we should be organising.
People are organising when they're planning a protest against her funeral. They're partying in the streets right now. Does that seem to you that like people are dancing on her grave?
Well, I think that was always going to happen. It was going to be a celebration. I was very fortunate. The night that she resigned, I had a gig in Belfast in Northern Ireland. So you can imagine how happy people were there. They were literally dancing in the streets. And I still have some of the hangover from that night left, knocking around my brain. But her death, I think, really is a moment for reflection on what she did and how we fight those same policies that she first espoused today, how we deal with the cynicism and the greed that she introduced into our society. And I've always believed that the best antidote to cynicism is activism. So pushing back rather than celebrating, I think, is how I'll be marking her passing.
Joey, how do you feel about people celebrating Thatcher's death?
Well, it's a funny thing that there's no real joy in death, but what's really going to be critical, like Billy says, is like you have to take action, try and change these things. Mm-hmm. That's more important than celebrating that somebody's dead. Very soon you're going to see all these even more tributes about how great she was from the right wing. The same thing they did with Ronald Reagan, who was the equivalent, obviously, over in North America.
Mm-hmm. Well, Mike, let me ask you about that, because I was thinking about the death of Reagan today. Reagan died in 2004, and he seems to be more of a hero now than he was during the time that he was in power. Even the Democrats routinely are talking about Reagan and invoking his name when they're talking about their programs. So have your feelings, Mike, about Ronald Reagan changed since your time in the Minutemen when he was in power?
No. I'm not into this revisionist. We got a lot of this U.S. About Vietnam War, about Reagan years. It's they just rewrite what went down.
You know, Brent,
I still feel the same.
If Ronald Reagan was running for office now, the Tea Party would throw him out. He's far too centrist for the Tea Party. They would never stand for his politics.
Yeah, I mean, politics definitely has moved further to the right than the time in the 1980s. But Joe, you were on the scene at the dawn of Reagan's New Morning in America, because DOA played outside the 1980 Republican convention in Detroit when Reagan was named as the Republican candidate. What do you remember about that performance and that event?
Well, we were playing a crowd of our supporters, which were like free-thinking people, about 2,000 people. And in the middle of our set, a crowd of about 2,000 pro-Reagan people came marching down the street with banners, waving like, "We love America, we love Reagan, commies go home, pinkos die, fags die," stuff like that. And it turned into a riot. And just before the riot started, actually that's when we decided, okay, I guess now is the time to play up Ronnie. It kind of worked out, and the Detroit police actually defused the thing before too many people got hurt, fortunately. But Reagan was, I totally agree, is a revisionist type thing to think that he was a great president. He was a terrible president. There's other terrible leaders at the time too that should be included, like Brian Mulroney from Canada and Helmut Kohl, who's the Chancellor of Germany. And the four of them had the worst policy, anti-people policy.
But you're talking about four of the most powerful people in the world at that time. So I want to try and get an idea of what it was like to be involved in a music scene that was so oppositional to figures that were so powerful in the 1980s. Mike, can you tell me a little bit about when you went from gig to gig? What were the fans talking about? How did music bring them together?
Yeah, well, Mr. Reagan made it really easy to write songs, you know. Mm-hmm. The guy was just, well, he read stuff from a script. I wonder how much was his own stuff. But the people he was supporting, you know, they were really feeling their oats. And like any farmer would tell you, you want a good crop, use a lot of manure. And those guys, they were just shoveling it on us. And coming of age, especially being a young Minuteman, we were 22. You know, we had already been through the indoctrination of how many years of school, and then this trying to reconcile things in your head between words and reality. There was a heavy thing this guy was back in Central America at the time. This didn't just galvanize us young guys, but, you know, my pop, 20 years in the Navy. Mm-hmm. He voted for Reagan the first time, but not the second time. They weren't going to get away with what they were doing without a fight, is the way we looked at it as Minutemen. You know, it was like when we played one time, first time in Holland, and the Nazi people tried to boo us off the stage. Yeah. You know, it was like, we're not going to just leave. And so we felt the same way here. Somehow we could survive.
What did you do when the neo-Nazis tried to boo you off the stage?
Well, they did boo the first band off, and D. Boone asked us downstairs before we went on there, we going to run? And Georgie said, nope. I said, I ain't either. And so they did that to us, and we didn't run. And I you know, it's a foreign situation, okay? But I felt that way in the U.S. a lot of times when we were playing gigs.
Did you have? I mean, did you
like
did
what
you
Joey was talking about?
Yeah, like did you meet the kind of angry mobs that Joey just mentioned that involved the Detroit
sometimes you had
police?
to deal with that. Yeah, sometimes it was the police.
And what about for you, Billy? Was it like that for you too?
No, I think in the UK it was a little bit different. I mean, we organised... the key event of Margaret Thatcher's period in office was a massive year-long strike by the National Union of Mine Workers. Right. And that allowed musicians to come together in solidarity with the miners. You met the same kind of bands at these gigs, you know, bands that were willing to take on the Thatcher government. So when the miners' strike ended and the miners were defeated, we looked to each other and said, well, what are we going to do? Are we going to just run? Are we going to walk away from this? Or are we going to try to push back. So what we decided to do was we decided to focus on the next general election, which was 1987.
Yep.
And we formed a cooperative collective of musicians allied with the Labour Party, which we called Red Wedge. The thing that held us together, really, Red Wedge, wasn't our support for the Labour Party, it was our opposition to Margaret Thatcher.
But Thatcher won that election in 1987. So, I mean, how did you reconcile with the efforts that you put into the opposition that you and other musicians came up with against her at that time?
Well, you know, you can't change the world by doing gigs, unfortunately. Ultimately, only the audience can change the world. You know, it's you can't expect musicians to turn those kind of things around. But, you know, we give it as good a shot as we could. And one of the things I was still am a huge fan of The Clash, but one of the things I thought they failed to do was to engage with mainstream politics. And I think as musicians, if you really do believe in change, you must find some way of engaging with what's actually going on in your backyard. And that's what we tried to do with Red Wedge.
Joe, Thatcher and Reagan and Mulroney were all re-elected decisively during their time in office. They were popular. Did that energize you, or did you think that you were banging your head against the wall?
Well, I think it's one of these things that it's like a long war against people like this with a series of battles. And, you know, like Billy said, you can't win every one. So I didn't feel de-energized by this. The funny thing, Thatcher probably had the same effect in England, I think, but when I do spoken word, I always ask the audience, who's the person most responsible for the rise of punk rock in America? And people will go, oh, Jello Biafra or Joey Ramone. I go, no, it's former President Ronald Reagan. It's just a big battle, and you can't stop fighting because you're defeated once. Otherwise, you might as well just lay down and die. And who wants to do that?
Mike, yeah. I'm curious about something you said when you said your dad voted for Reagan the first time around. Your dad was a Navy guy. And when you were out facing audiences and trying to create that spirit of opposition, did you feel like an outlaw yourself?
Well, yeah. I mean, punk in U.S. was tiny. Most people were not into it.
Yeah.
And it was really strange, the views of the punk scene amongst the powers that be, and
they were very
really
fond.
They
were very fond of pushing back. Margaret Thatcher's right-hand man was a guy named Norman Tebbit, and he had whenever I was on the radio in the UK, he used to ring up and complain. He used to ring the producers. He did, yeah. It's ridiculous when you think about it now. But I think, at the time, now with the internet, you've got many ways of communicating and many ways of expressing your anger. But back then, if you were angry, if you were working class, you were angry about something, the only medium open to you was pop music, to learn to play or to rap or to write or to gig and get out there and do it. So it didn't matter that the scene was small. That was your way of engaging. And that, that's changed somewhat now. I don't think, every angry kid is going to learn to play guitar, write songs and sit in the back of a van for 5 years. But that, at the time, that's why music was so important. It was the only medium that we had to speak to one another and to our parents' generations and to Thatcher and the opposition.
Mike, from this conversation that we're having, it seems to me like in the 1980s, bands like the Minutemen spoke passionately and directly about politics, about people in power. They were critical. Do you think that kind of directness and passion is still alive in music today?
Yeah. You got Joey, you got Billy right here. They ain't laying down.
Yeah.
They ain't mellowing out. But you're probably talking about the next shift, right? The younger people.
Yeah. What do you think?
Yeah. I think there is fire there. It's going to articulate it in another way, like Billy says. It's not going to be just band stuff. It's going to be code monkeys and stuff, right? This anonymous group. There's going to be reaction,
Joey, what do you think?
The activism comes in many forms. The thing about music as a way to speak out, that's still a great vehicle, but whatever people can do on the internet, that's actually supplanted it. I tried to run for politics recently, was defeated. But one of the big things I found talking to people was how disengaged people my age, middle-aged people were. They'd given up on politics. And how disengaged young people were, especially. They had never voted. They had never even thought about it. They didn't know who was running or what the issues were. So if you don't have an informed opinion, you end up being like a leaf, and you end up getting blown whichever way the wind goes. So you have to try and learn things. And guys like Billy Bragg or Mike, myself, Jello Biafra, Henry Rollins, whatever, like activists from that era, that's part of it. But there's got to be some young people come along that inspire them, because young people are usually inspired by young people.
And Billy, are you hearing those young people in music?
No, I'm not necessarily so much in music, but I think the world has changed. The world has changed to the extent that Margaret Thatcher couldn't be leader of a political party in the UK today. She's much too radical. She's much too stringent. I think what we experienced in the even in the 80s in the UK certainly was still the same wave that began in the 60s when a generation challenged their parents and brought to end decades of deference. And I think that was still prevalent then, but that has changed now. And I think what people are looking for in politics now is greater accountability, and that's where the kids who are getting onto the internet that Mike spoke about are working there. They have realised that with the internet, with the availability of information, they can hold the powerful to account. Not just politicians, but people like Rupert Murdoch, Exxon,
the big banks.
Lehman Brothers, these kind of people. The internet can hold them to account. So I think the Billy Braggs are more likely to be out there because, frankly, the bad side of the internet. If you could see the stuff, the shit that I got through Twitter for even just saying that Margaret Thatcher was dead. If I was a 19-year-old Billy Bragg just starting out now and I had to put up with that kind of shitstorm every time I raised my head, I might think about going on the X Factor. So it's a double-edged sword.
Some people say great music thrives in times of opposition. So would the music of the 1980s, would the music of that era have been as powerful without those conservative governments in power? Mike, what do you think?
Orson Welles, right, in The Third Man. Switzerland, 500 years of peace, and they got the cuckoo clock, right? I know what you mean. That I get asked that a lot. Yeah, it was easy to write songs then. It's still, you got to be conscious, you got to be aware. But yeah, that was a special time.
Joe, what do you think?
Well, every era has its villains. I mean, if you look at the Tea Party and different right-wing factions around the world, and racists and warmongers and uber capitalists that wish to, take advantage of everybody they can. There's plenty of cannon fodder to write great songs anytime.
Bill?
Each generation has to work out the difference between good and evil. And in my generation, that was embodied by Margaret Thatcher.
Billy Bragg, Mike Watt, Joe Keithley. Thank you for taking the time out, all right?
Great to hang with you guys as well.
Okay.
You too.
Okay.
See you out on the road there somewhere.